I'm Eric Schilling. I'm an engineer and I mix primarily these days. I'm just had my 60th birthday, which in some ways I probably shouldn't have. I didn't think I was going to get here, but I have. So I've been doing this most of my life. I had a passion for it when I was very, very young. And I count myself really fortunate that I knew at a young age what I wanted to do. So that brought me from San Francisco, where I grew up, to South Florida in '77 to work for a really well-known studio down here. And I first came here in '77 to this studio, to Criteria Hit Factory. Lived for many years down here and then eventually migrated up to Central Florida. And now these days I live in Florida, but I travel all the time across the US. So when I was 16, I worked in a public broadcast station that produced a lot of their own content. And a gentleman came through the door. I'd been there 5 months, let's say, and I was doing everything from the pledge drives to doing the new show, and a guy came in named Bob Olson, who was a Motown guy. And Bob had worked in Detroit from about 65 through 71 when they moved from Detroit. So I became friends with Bob and really just attached myself to him, and we would, go eat meals, we'd work on projects there, and I was just constantly like a sponge, What does a compressor do? How did you record the Four Tops? What is Marvin Gaye? How does he do his vocals? It was just the whole gamut. And Bob taught me all of my starting point for what microphones do, for what compressors do, how a console works, what you're trying to do when you're trying to capture somebody who performs. And it's really from the school of you have to pass it on. And everybody who came from his world was mentored by somebody who came before them. Because remember, up until probably 76 or so, there were no schools to go learn this at. So you really had to apprentice and mentor. So I kind of barely made I went to school, high school, and I graduated kind of by the skin of my teeth. But I owe a great debt to Bob. Now, along with this, the people who worked there, the people who designed the gear and built the gear, because in those days you still built your own consoles a lot. These people designed and built their own boards. And one of the guys named Wayne actually went on to build the Lucasfilm ranch. So he was on the ground floor of that and then went down to run the Fox stage. So I grew up around people had a lot of time with production, and then also people who built and designed gear, who what I would call old school techs that designed and could fix and everybody did that then. It's very common. So when I went to the record plant, because I got a job very fortunately through a friend of mine when I was 19, so this was 75. And I go and I talk to the chief, Tom Fly, and I talk to Chief Tom Scott, who also went on to the ranch. I talk to them and then I wait for them to call me. Now, I did something in my character that I never do. Every day for about 2 weeks I'd call and say, is Tom Fly there? Can I talk to him? I want to know if, maybe he wants me to come over, and it's just not my character. So about 2 weeks down the line, I come home from a party one night with my girlfriend at the time. It's 2 a.m. And the studio calls me and says, can you come over now? So it's like 2 a.m. and I live across the bay, so it's a 40-minute drive to get to the plant. And of course I'm saying, absolutely, I'll be right there. So I come over and my first session was a Sly Stone session. And Sly was famous for working like a day without sleeping. And the whole crew had been in there for a day and a half. And they needed somebody to take over. So I was an assistant. I wasn't sitting behind the board. So they called in somebody to sit behind the board and somebody to assist. So I get to the studio like about 3 in the morning. and work for 3 hours with them, and they finally go home at 6 a.m. That was my first experience there. And what I always tell people is, if you have a passion for what you do, you will do things that aren't in your character sometimes, things that take you out of your comfort zone, but like calling a guy day after day for 2 weeks. So I do that. I think this is great. I got my foot in the door, and they call me back and they say, well, we like you. So for what you're going to do for now is clean the bathrooms and stock the Coke machine and vacuum. And what I didn't know at the time is Chris Stone, who owned the plant with a partner, this was his way of kind of separating the wheat from the chaff, as you would say, finding out who really wanted to do this as opposed to, oh, this will be cool, this looks fun. So for 5 weeks or so, I came in 5 days a week and cleaned the John, filled the Coke machine with beer, which is what we used to do, and vacuumed. But I was so happy to have my foot in the door, I didn't care. And then after that time period, I started getting put on smaller one-day things. And not long after that, I did, I worked on Fleetwood Mac's album at the time they were there doing the Rumors album. So I worked on that for about 10 days as an assistant, which was a fascinating thing to see the way they wrote songs and creatively how they did things. I can't say that I worked on a lot of that album because that took more than a year to produce. So at that time, I then worked with the client who was doing a Elvin Bishop album, and if you recall, they had a really big hit called Fooled Around and Fell in Love. It was a huge smash in the US, and they were doing the next album that came to the plant, and the guy who came, who tracked it, recorded it, did the mix, lived down here in Florida, and they were building a studio for such clients as Joe Walsh, the Eagles, the list goes on, but he asked me if I wanted to move to Florida, if I wanted to come work for them, and I'm 20, and I don't think about a whole lot else except, you mean I get to do like more cool stuff? And I said, absolutely. So I packed all my stuff into a 10-foot truck and I moved down here to Florida. I've never really looked back in terms of that. But so then worked a little bit on Joe Walsh, and eventually met Gloria Estefan, because at that time was the beginning of the Latin craze here. And it was really a secondary kind of work market because they didn't have a lot of money to produce stuff then. And oddly enough, Gloria was the very last paying client in the studio that I worked for. And they were closing down the studio because they were going to move it. So Gloria comes in, and in those days when you recorded a Latin thing, you did it in like 2 weeks, from tracking to mix, done. Because they didn't have a lot of money to record with. So over the years, I've done 12 projects with Gloria. I've done other things with her, side projects, but 12 full-length things. But during that time, when I worked for her, I also freelanced. So, for instance, at one point, there was a Bowie session here for a week that I got called to do and spent some time with him, which was pretty fast and pretty fun to see the way that he worked. And then gradually in the last 15 years, I've kind of moved into doing a lot of broadcast work. So I do a lot of award shows, which means I work with people from Bruno Mars to Beyonce to Dave Grohl. I mean, the list just goes on and on. It kind of tends to be who's on the show. And what's fun about that is the music is always changing, and I will tell you, there's no style that I don't like. So I just like it to be good. If in its genre, if it's hip hop, R&B, if it's country, if it's well done, if it's good, then I like it. If it's not the A-list stuff, I have to admit, it's not quite as much fun. So there's no genre that I don't enjoy. Okay, so in 2006, I lived in Central Florida at the time, and Gloria and me had a relationship for many years. I'd worked with her for a long time, and from time to time I would do a benefit show with her. And we've done some AIDS shows, and this one was a cancer event she did one time a year in July. And she called me and asked me if I would come down and help do the sound for it. And I did it at a greatly cheaper price because it was a benefit. So on that night, I'd come home from Nashville, where I'd done a mastering for something I'd done. So I got on the road about 7 o'clock. I lived near the Kennedy Space Center at the time, and it's about a 3-hour drive here. It's raining. At the time I had a BMW 325, which is a pretty sturdy car. And I'm almost here, and I'm next to the football stadium. And I've slowed down because the roads are wet, and I don't like to drive really fast when the roads are wet. And I come over a little rise, and I see headlights just staring at me, and I think, well, I'm not going to be able to do much about this. I'm on the freeway, I'm in the left lane, and there are headlights staring at me, which is obviously not a normal thing. So I really don't have much time to react. I put on the brakes. I kind of graze the car. Car spins several times, and it eventually comes to a stop. I kind of look around and take stock. I'm one of those people, when I get into a crunch, I actually tend to get calmer. I don't get panicked because I know this from diving. I've had things happen, I get calmer. So car comes to a stop, I kind of look around and I say, okay, there's a hole in the floor. My leg looks like it's broken. I'm trying to get my cell phone to work. I can't really manage to get my cell phone to work, probably because I was in shock. And funnily enough, the very first thing I hear is the kid whose car I'd hit, who had left his car parked in the left lane. I hear him say, dude, is the first word. He says, dude, are you okay? And my response is, dude, I'm not okay. Why don't you call somebody? So he calls somebody, police come finally. I'm on the county line, essentially. And the police come, but there's no fire department, there's no ambulance, so I'm in the car for about an hour. And if you know in this realm, when somebody's hurt, there's the golden time, which is they want to get to you as quickly as they can because your chances that you would be able to survive are better the faster they get to you. So after this time period, I say to the policeman, where is the fire department? Why? Because the fire department, I know where it is. It's about 1.5 miles down the road. I know exactly where it is. No fire department. So they eventually come. I've probably been there close to 2 hours. They come, and the last thing I recall, it's funny, was they get out the jaws of life to cut the car. And they're cutting him, and one of the guys says, no, go back and get the big ones. Because I was in a German-built car, they're very sturdy, and when you go to cut them, they're not. And then he puts an IV in my neck, and that's the last thing that I remember till I began to come around, probably about a week down the line. And when you're hurt like that, what happens is you're on a lot of meds, and they had induced a coma for me because I was fairly hurt, and they do that so your body will kind of calm down and you won't so your body can just focus on trying to heal. So when you start to come to, things are dreams to you. You perceive them as, something's going on, and then over a course of days it goes from being a dream to you finally kind of get to the point where you realize it's real. So in that time period, I'd been out for 5-6 days. My wife was still at home, the cops came to the door and knocked on the door at 3 a.m. And you don't want to get a knock on your door at 3 a.m. from the cops. And they didn't know anything. They just said, you need to get down to South Florida right now. He's at Jackson Hospital, which is one of the best spots to go if you're going to be really hurt. She called my best friend Ron. He got there first. Then my daughters come in. Then my family starts flying in. So imagine, and I will always tell people this, it's harder on the spouse than it is you. Because when you're really hurt, you don't realize how hurt you are. So my wife's phone starts to ring off the hook, and you know my kids, so Brittany takes charge as she can, and she starts a blog and starts fielding all the phone calls. Because the doctors are saying to my wife, we give him a 10% chance that he's going to survive. And doctors are very cautious when they tell you things, so she's getting this info and she has to deal with that. So as I start to come around, I have a bunch of my family there. I know that Gloria came, and I remember her talking into my ear, like we were having a conversation. And you know that people have come to see you, but you don't remember a thing that they said. You see them, you go, oh, that's Phil Ramone, or that's Gloria, but you don't really, or Emilio, but you don't remember a thing about what they said to you. But I can tell you, when you're hurt, that means a lot to you, because knowing that people have come to see you and care about you and are praying for you helps you. And one of the things that was fascinating about this is that spring, a very good friend of mine had died from cancer. By the time I went to see her, she was in a very drugged up state, and at the time, the dialogue didn't make sense. When I was in that drugged up state, I understood, because I understood that you're just aware of people. So during the next 3 weeks or 4 weeks, I gradually come around more to the point. Now I can't talk because they've trached me. When you get trached, they give you a device you can screw in to talk. It's like a little diaphragm thing. It's like a speaker almost. So, you know, they finally get to the point where they can put it in. They pulled the tube out. And my wife's there, and my daughters, and the first words out of my mouth was, oh, honey, I love you. It wasn't that. It was like, I got to get better. I got to mix the Latin Grammys. Being sort of the workaholic, I think she wanted to kill me. You know, but she knows me, and she understands what my motivations are. But it was a funny day because, you know, I still didn't know how sick I was. And part of what happens to people when they're sick is they don't realize how sick they are a lot of the time. So you tend to think, you know, your constant goal is, when you're really sick, folks would say to me, how did you do it? I'm like, it's not hard. You know, you rise to the occasion. When something happens to you that's a crisis, as humans, we have strength that we don't know we have, and people pray for you, and you have faith, and it's just, you rise to the occasion. So I would always go, okay, I mean, I see you, so my next goal is to be able to talk. And then once I get there, my next goal is, oh, I get to go to the 3rd floor, which took about 2 months for me to go to the 3rd floor of Jackson, because I came into floor 2, which is where they put all the burn people and the really, really sick people. So I always would look for just what's the next milestone. So I was there for 4 months. So every time you jump ahead, it's kind of like a milestone, and you don't think like, oh, when I get out, I'm going to go to the beach and play tennis. You just go, no, I just want to get from the 2nd floor to the 3rd floor. And that's pretty much how I thought most of the time. By the time I got to the 3rd floor, you know, I was this was healing, I could talk. But I still had a long ways to go. The other thing that I would say about the experience is a couple of times I had a couple of nurses that I will always recall and remember, because they helped me through really tough times. Like, because doctors kind of make rounds and you don't see them very much, but the nurses are the people who are there all the time for you. And they give you, you know, some comfort and some hope. I mean, they take care of you, but they also give you a great deal of hope. So month 2, I got out of ICU. I'm still on a lot of drugs. I had a lot of procedures to be done because I had broken a very large vein in here. The large blood supply that goes up this way back to your heart. And so they had to cut this open to fix it. Because I'd been in my car for so long, my friends told me I looked like the Stay Puft Man, Marshmallow. I was so swollen. And they couldn't close this. So imagine for 3 months I have a piece of plastic over here. And when they come and clean it, I can look at my lungs if I want to. I didn't really do that very often, but so I still had a long ways to go. I still had a lot of pain meds and stuff, but people coming to see me was a really big deal for me. And it really helped me see the light at the end of it for myself. And I never doubted that I would get better. I just didn't know how long it was going to take. So when I did find out down the line that I'd been as sick as I was kind of surprised because I didn't know that. So anyway, that process took 4 months. And when I finally got home, I went back up to my house near the Space Center up north. My wife, I had in-home care. My wife had it all set up for me. And I used to be very squeamish. I'm not squeamish anymore. Like I used to, I had a nurse come and I said, you don't need to come, I can change the wounds. I know what the wound care is. I know what shots I have to give myself. And I'd been home 3 weeks and I got in our second car and I went for a drive. And I didn't think twice about it. My wife was afraid I would be traumatized. I wouldn't want to get in the car, and I got out there on my crutches and got in the car and we did a little loop, drove for about 3 miles and said, I think I'm good. And went out and shopped for a car after I got my insurance money the next week and bought a car. Just, I'm not sure why, but I wasn't traumatized. I felt very fortunate because I know a lot of folks get hurt and it's a big trauma for them. And example, when they decided to take my leg at Jackson, what they do is they made me wait a long time to make that choice. I kept saying, well, what are we going to do about the leg? Because my leg was in pretty bad shape. And I remember the doctors when I was still pretty sick and I was still on a lot of drugs. I remember they were talking about it around me. So I remember the conversation kind of in a kind of a blurry way. But when the time came, the doctor came in, we had a very succinct conversation. If you do this, you're probably gonna have a lot of pain the rest of your life. You can have surgery, or you can do this and you'll get a prosthetic. And I said, I think I'll take door B, I'll take the prosthetic. It makes more sense to me. And I didn't find it traumatic, probably because I could make the choice. And as a good friend of mine says, ears work, hands work, I'm kind of all good. I can go back to work and do what I need to do. Right now, if I flex the leg, I still feel my foot as if it's asleep. That's what it feels like. I can still feel it. I occasionally get sharp pains. It's relatively rare, but I do get it. Once in a while I get an itch, which is kind of more of a pain in the ass. Because the way I deal with it is you have to take off the leg and scratch the stump. And it makes the itch, it makes it feel like you're scratching your foot, but not tons. I get it from time to time. When I first came home, it took me a little while to get used to being home. But my journey was not done because I came home with a giant skin graft here. I had no muscle here, it was all skin graft. And the doctors took the position that they didn't really want to change it from that because I could have a bad outcome with a major surgery, and so I decided early on I didn't want to live with a skin graft sitting there for the rest of my life. So me and my wife is a research junkie and she's really good at it, so She researches the procedures of what to, because all my muscles are here on the side. And this is all skin grafts, because my leg, if you look, it's got light spots. That's where they took the skin from. So we research and we identify 4 people around the states that we want to go see and talk to, do various things to fix this procedure. And we go to San Francisco, to back here in South Miami, to Jackson, to Chicago, and then to Memphis, which was our last stop. So every doctor we make appointments. So the Memphis guy calls her back, the doctor himself. He says, "So are you a doctor?" And Susan says, "No, I just," because she knew all the terminology, large abdominal wall closure, all this stuff. So we do all the tours. The last stop is Memphis. I go to meet the guy, and all the other doctors is like, well, bad outcomes and this and that. And surgeons are kind of funny sometimes, because sometimes they're very detached. And this guy, said that he runs the trauma center for the Memphis hospital, like the major trauma center. And we sit down to talk, and the first thing we get is that we both like Macintoshes. We have iPads, we have MacBook Pros, so right at there we got a little bonding happening. And Dr. Crowe says to me, "You know, I like to do things that are challenging," and he has developed a new technique to kind of reconstruct this. And he walks me through it, and I just get a good vibe about him, and Susan does too. And so we're back up in like 3 weeks. We have a procedure which is a 9-hour procedure. It's a long one. So I go in to the hospital, and Dr. Crouse, and Susan now has been, my wife, has now been through a lot of stuff with me. And the last thing she wants to deal with is another complicated procedure where the outcome, something could happen. And Dr. Crouse called her at every major point in the procedure, like after the first 2 hours, he calls, says, "Okay," he gets her on the speakerphone from the OR, says, "Okay, so we're here and we're gonna do this." And so he calls her like 4 times during the procedure. I finally come through, I wake up and I'm like, "We got it done, I'm good." And I'm there for 10 days. And so that was kind of the last of the stuff, and we actually became friends, me and the surgeon, after that. And I invited him to the Grammys a couple of years afterwards, because his son had passed, I found out. And I get seats to the show, and me and Susan decided we were so grateful for what he had done. Because when you're in a hospital, the surgeons don't really come to see you except once, and Dr. Crouse came by every day to see me. That's not common. So it was really nice to do something for him. And so come to find out, and I'll wrap up this story. That year we had Mick Jagger came to perform, and I got to do that performance on the show. And I've been a Stones fan since I was like 10. So Dr. Crouse, I got him a hard pass, so he's hanging with me the whole week. And we do the performance, and Dawn and Mick go up the ramp to come into my truck. They don't want anybody else in the truck, and so but my doctor's sitting right outside in the chair, and he gets to see Mick like walk in the truck, and I sit and work with Mick, and then we're done. He tells me after the fact that when he got out of med school, his dream was to go on tour with the Stones and be their doctor. So I thought it was kind of cool that I could do something for him that could get him a little close to that dream that he'd had. You know, he got to meet him and see that experience. So it had a sort of a nice button on how that went. So at that point, then I was done with my major stuff. Probably more of the jokester side of me, to give you a story about how I think about it, a friend of mine does the Jimmy Kimmel show. He mixes the bands like I do for broadcast. We've been friends a long time. So when I'm out on the West Coast, I'll oftentimes go to see him, and across the street is the Kodak Theater and Grauman's Chinese and all that stuff, and there's a parking garage. So if I'm with a friend of mine from South Florida and we go to see him, And I pull up into the blue spots, and I just say, not thinking, sometimes it's great to be handicapped because I get good parking. So that's an example of I'm not particularly traumatized about it. So at the end of this long story, I've told you about my health and what occurred to me in my car accident and all that stuff. I really credit the faith and the prayers that people brought to me. And as I said before, you don't know how strong you are until you have to rise to that occasion. I think you would all be surprised at what strengths you find in terms of having faith and people around you that care about you. I used to be a person that would worry about a lot of stuff around work or financial things, issues. Kind of two things that happened to me after I came home was, one, I wouldn't say that I'm blunt with people, but I'm pretty direct with people because I want to be, because I feel like I don't know when's the last time I'm going to see them. So I try and be really direct to people, and I also try not to worry about things I can't control. A lot of things are not in our control specifically. If I'm going to keep my job, if I'm going to sell my house, what's going to happen next year. Life is a very funny thing that way. And nobody knows their last day on earth, and nobody knows when something's going to happen to them. So I always count my blessings, because every day for me is a day that I might not have been here, and tomorrow I may not be here.